Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to you all. Contrary to my ordinary custom, I've more of a composed talk. I was working and writing it. As I said to our brothers when I arrived, it was a race against battery life on the British Rail's antiquated trains. It wasn't British Rail, of course. That's an antiquated reference. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. The subject is Escape the Matrix. It's already an antiquated reference, in fact, isn't it? I'm assuming that everybody has seen the film and that this is the reference. So let me start by a dictionary definition of matrix, or several definitions. In fact, I don't know if any of you have done any internet research on this matter before coming. Does everybody know Wikipedia well? Well, you know that disambiguation, there's like an incredibly long list of terms underneath that. I've just selected a few from some quite well-established dictionaries. Matrix, an environment or material in which something develops, a surrounding medium or structure, something within or from which something else originates, develops, or takes form. So these are close to the core meaning. And then we have mathematics, which was one of the last memories I have of my mathematics studies, which left some scars in my soul. Mathematics, a rectangular array of quantities or expressions in rows and columns that is treated as a single entity and manipulated according to particular rules. It's also an organizational structure in which two or more lines of command, responsibility, or communication may run through the same individual. I suspect you're not any the more enlightened after that, but it's the proper place to start. Man is asleep. When he wakes up, he finds that he is a unit in a great machine matrix. And this is a quote I find from Wikipedia about the film. In a future in which reality as perceived by most humans is actually a simulated reality created by sentient machines to pacify and subdue the human population while their body's heat and electrical activity are used as an energy source. Even if this is a political metaphor, like all good science fiction and fable, it is suspiciously close to our circumstances in several uncomfortable elements. The suspicion, however, that we are asleep is as old as mankind, as indeed are images of matrices, but they have not always been malign images. I'm going to refer to Plato, and I don't want you to think that this is an extremely sort of intellectual reference. We've actually been persuaded by by the elite of our age that these people, Shakespeare, Plato, Beethoven, are all very, very inaccessible except to very few people. But you'll find in most cases that these people are saying something very approachable and very accessible. And Plato and the other Greeks of his time were pondering the real dilemmas of the human situation. They were really concerned for the human being and trying to find out what was a way out of our tragedy. In Plato's Republic, we find this allegory of our being asleep while apparently awake in his tale of the people in the cave who sit chained with their heads held rigidly looking forward, far behind them at the back of the cave. They watch the shadows projected before them of people who are behind them, passing back and forward and transacting in various ways, and they take the shadows for reality. Their heads are fixed rigidly and they can't look back. So as far as they're concerned, the shadows are real. Then the prisoners have their shackles removed so that they can turn around and see the great fire that projects the shadows of actual objects on the cave wall. And they can see the actual objects that cause the shadows. In a surprising development, however, they are then taken out of the cave and they see the world outside, its rivers, plants, animals and people, and they finally come to see the sun itself, the source of the light that illuminates everything. Some of them return to the cave and tell other prisoners of what they have seen outside. They are relatively blind in the cave after having been out in the daylight, and that adds to the causes that lead to their being ridiculed and rejected. This allegory was for Plato about the power of philosophical reasoning and reflection in comparison with ordinary people's undigested everyday experience. Nevertheless, it remains a vivid and immediate allegory. The meaning is clear to us. In it, once the veil is lifted, what is revealed is good. What is hidden is good. The sun is an allegory for the good. What a difference from our modern paranoid condition and our modern paranoid allegory, in which we believe that when the veil is removed, a monstrous conspiracy awaits our eyes. Implicit in this is that truth does exist, and that it is noble to seek it. But for Plato, this was the task of an elite, the philosophers. The masses, in his view, are destined to reject and revile what they cannot understand, or that which makes them uncomfortable, and perhaps calls on them to awake from their slumbers. Let us sleep, they seem to say. Let us sleep. Plato tells another allegory, one which he inadvertently and perhaps mistakenly calls a lie, the noble lie. And this works much ill in our history. The noble lie is a fictional account that Plato's Socrates gives for the origin of the three classes in his proposed republic. He talks of a stratified society where the populace is told a sort of Phoenician tale. And this is the tale. The earth, as being their mother, delivered them. And now, as if their land were their mother and their nurse, they ought to take thought for her. They ought to take thought for her and defend her against any attack, and regard the other citizens as their brothers and children of the self-same earth. While all of you in the city are brothers, we will say in our tale, yet God, in fashioning those of you who are fitted to hold rule, mingled gold in their generation, for which reason they are the most precious. But in the helpers, silver, and iron and brass in the farmers and other craftsmen. And as you are all akin, though for the most part you will breed after your kinds, it may sometimes happen that a golden father will beget a silver son, and that a golden offspring would come from a silver sire, and that the rest would in like manner be born of one another. So that the first and chief injunction that the God lays upon the rulers is that of nothing else are they to be such careful guardians and so intently observant as of the intermixture of these metals in the souls of their offspring. And if sons are born to them with an infusion of brass or iron, they shall by no means give way to pity and treatment. No, they shall by no means give way to pity in their treatment of them, but shall assign to each the status that is due to his nature, and thrust them out among the artisans or the farmers. And again, if from these there is born a son with unexpected gold or silver in his composition, they shall honour such and bid them go up higher, some to the office of guardian, some to the assistantship, alleging that there is an oracle that the city shall then be overthrown when the man of iron or brass is its guardian. Plato's Socrates claims that if the people believed this myth, that would have a good effect, making them more inclined to care for the state and one another. This is his noble lie. Was that clear? I know it's a slightly antiquated language, but there is also a beauty in the older usages of English. Was it clear? Was the meaning accessible to you? Because I don't mind to interrupt at any point and to make things clear that are maybe a bit ambiguous or obscure. This noble lie or allegory is about class and power distinctions. It was meant to enable people to recognize talent, power and knowledge wherever they should occur, no matter what the class of people. But the noble lie has since been used to justify much. Arguably, the first lie to distinctively mark and shape our age was that of Christianity, when adopted by the Roman power elite. Christianity praised poverty, humility and suffering, but reserved them for the already poor, humble and suffering masses. It laid before them the ideal or an ideal of manhood, to die passively at the hands of the empire, expecting some kind of transformation and beatification. In other words, it held out martyrdom as a noble goal in itself. This has marked idealism in this country, in this culture ever since. How often have idealists not uselessly thrown their lives away? And as a note with idealism, we again touch on Plato's ambivalent heritage and his particular understanding of the idea and the ideal. But this is beyond the remit of this talk today. Let us return to Plato's cave. The dwellers in the cave are you and me in our ordinary experience. The people who leave the cave and experience the world outside and see the sun itself do so by the light of intellect. What they see is the light of the good. The West has marched forward under this flag since the Renaissance, when Plato's works once more were read after a lapse of almost 1,000 years. Indeed, arguably, the West has marched under this banner from long before that, for, as Nietzsche famously said, Christianity is Platonism for the masses. Plato, too, must escape the illusion of the matrix, in this case a cave. But when he escapes, he does not find a malign conspiracy, but is freed from illusion and witnesses the all-illuminating light of the good. Yet undoubtedly it is Plato's heritage that is a part of what has brought us to the pass that we are in. And I am assuming that you agree with me that we are in some degree of trouble as a species. How did his vision of the Son of Good become transformed into a picture of an enslaving tyranny of the machine? Some of it is the very nature of the technology itself. And a more profound examination of it would substitute for technology, technique. This is the age of technique, not just machines. We thought we invented it to serve us, but we have come to serve it. It grows ever more powerful, more intelligent, and we grow ever more impotent and with a dumbed-down culture presented to us by the most sophisticated technology the world has known. The technology grows ever more clever, and the content grows ever more disgraceful and stupid. Nothing is more emblematic of its power than the drone, an entirely unmanned machine that guns down wedding parties and families, and then they call it collateral damage. Except there is always the impotent human being sitting behind the monitor and directing the affair, with his impotence amplified by the technology into this dreadful power. We could say, once you use an amplifier, the initial human signal can be weaker and weaker while the output becomes stronger and stronger. The programmer's rule, rubbish in, rubbish out, however, is inexorable. Why? Man forgot that he himself is a part of nature. By science he studied nature, assuming himself to be the observer outside it. Even when the quantum discoveries showed him that the very act of observation changes what is observed, even the very tiniest subatomic particles, man still continues to act defiantly as if he were outside of everything, like a god, looking on and directing the affair. From that observation and his undeniably amazing discoveries, he invented technologies. They reflect that division of man from nature, which is a fatal split that runs through our history. Therefore, he assumes that technology is something that he is bringing about rather than something that has its own destiny, which is expressed through him. The terrible fear of the Matrix is that our technology has a life of its own that is malevolent. It is the same as the fear of Frankenstein's monster, the fear of our own scientific creations taking on a life of their own against us. Both of these allegories are joined at the hip, because in both the cave and the Matrix, one must come out of them to find knowledge and freedom. Yet the Matrix is defined in our dictionary definition as an environment or material in which something develops, a surrounding medium or structure. That is not a malign image, and it is not something necessarily to escape. Matrix comes from a cluster of words around a root which includes, and I'd like you to guess, what is the root of matrix? A little knowledge of Latin will help, but in fact you know...
Mater, which is mother.
Yes, exactly. Mater or mater, which is mother. The matrix comes from the word for mother. Matrix means, in its root, it means a female animal kept for breeding, and later came to mean the womb itself. And these are positive and merciful images. Yet modern man is alienated from his mother. This is not so evident in Muslim culture as it is in my society, what I have come from. It is all too evident. Is that Freud's malign heritage, or was Freud just the first to document this phenomenon that emerged in our history? Was he cause or effect? I do not answer that question. Because men are alienated from their mothers, they are alienated in some essential way from women entirely. Thus, women are not honoured in our time. They might temporarily be adored and worshipped for something they are temporarily, but they are not honoured for who they actually are. In another telling of a cave story, in the Quran, in Surah Al-Kahf, the young men, and the word used here is from the root of the Arabic word futulwa. Who knows what futulwa means? Have you come across this word? Futulwa is a very profound word. It's about the fata. The fata is the young man. But Futuwa gave birth to organizations within Muslim society which would have to be called chivalric. And they led, in fact, to the chivalric orders of the West. There seems an undeniable connection. The chivalric orders, and for example, in Ottoman society, there were orders in the society which inculcated in young men in particular the values of worship of the divine, service, generosity, kindness, all of the noble qualities of character. And this is the word used in Surah Al-Kahf for these young men who go into the cave. They go into the cave. They are chivalrous young men. They are already illuminated, but their people reject them. They are already of the standing of Plato's men who have left the cave and seen the sun that represents the good, or of an even higher standing than that. Having the chivalric quality called futuwa in Arabic, they are already far beyond the philosophers, for not only have they identified the good intellectually, but they have embodied it in the highest possible way, in their tireless service for others, for the poor, towards women, their generosity and their selflessness. Their fate is the same as the philosophers in Plato's allegory, for they are ridiculed and worse. Because of their people's rejection, they have recourse to the cave. Here the cave is a positive and protective image. The cave is the place of knowledge and safety. There they fall into a deep sleep for perhaps 300 or more years, from which they emerge to a time in which they are recognized and people are astounded by them. They are welcomed, endorsed and accepted. The circle is complete. The various elements of this study of mine are then conjoined in one last cave story. But this time, not a myth, but history. So let us set the scene. Because the scene then is what determines our scene today. Plato's opposition of people who have seen the sun that represents goodness and the people of the cave who are unilluminated and who oppose them and call them liars, particularly the power and financial elite, is the central thread of history. It is a grid you can apply to history to see what is going on. But it is subtle. It is not a dualism. It's not a simple dualism as many modern people are prone to, of the kind of Star Wars good and evil. This is a subtle grid. It depends on who people are, not who they say they are. How often the deed gives lie to the word. We have seen the dreadful deal of the Roman Empire and its use of Christianity for its own geopolitical purposes. Thus died the heritage of one who had come out of the cave, seen the sun, and come back to tell the people in the cave. Yet his heritage, peace be upon him, was both propagated and made official religion in word, while being denied in deed. Inasmuch as it was propagated and upheld, it endured, but this other fateful destiny of the mass, of the legions, and their remorseless slaughter was also to hand. It has reached down to our time directly. The legions are on the move more than ever. They have done to many a city what their forebears did to Carthage. What did the Romans do to Carthage? Does anybody know? Do you know this opposition of the city of Carthage in Rome? Carthage, where was Carthage?
Modern day Tunisia.
Modern day Tunisia. What did they do?
Well, they destroyed it, basically.
They destroyed it. They flattened it. They killed everybody. You see? This is emblematic of Roman power. And there's a very sinister man called Major Peters, I've forgotten his first name, who wrote a very sinister and yet insightful document called Constant Conflict. He wrote it in the 90s he's one of the forward thinkers for the American Army, looking to the kind of conflicts they would have to face. And he said about Fallujah during the Iraq War, he said the Americans should do to Fallujah what the Romans had done to Carthage. Just naked power, cynicism of a most pragmatic sort, but a most cold and heartless sort. So the legions are on the move. The Americans, more than any other power, are the inheritors. But please don't take what I'm saying as anti-Americanism. They have other techniques. Death squads, which have ravaged much of the earth in those years called the Cold War, which were far from cold for many murdered people in Indonesia, Southeast Asia and South America, and in Africa. The noble lie is also very active, and thanks to another self-proclaimed follower of Plato, Leo Strauss, has actively shaped the foreign policy of more than the United States. But now the lie is quite ignoble. It is the lie of the manifest destiny of white American consumers and their allies to shape the world and, of course, to plunder its resources, to guzzle up existence and drain it entirely and call it something other than what it really is. In De Vita e Moribus Julii Agricolae, excuse my rotten Latin, Tacitus cites a speech by British chieftain Calchagos addressing assembled warriors about Rome's insatiable appetite for conquest and plunder. Calchagos was the leader of the Caledonian Confederacy, who fought the Roman army of Gnaeus Julius Agricola at the Battle of Mons Graupius in northern Scotland in 83 or 84 of our present era. Agricola was the father-in-law of Tacitus, and yet Tacitus speaks with some sympathy for him, or he puts in his mouth words with some sympathy for him. We don't know for sure that Calchagos said these things. The chieftain's sentiment can be contrasted to peace given to the world, which was frequently inscribed on Roman medals. Calchagos says, because they didn't know better, they called it civilization when it was part of their slavery. To ravage, to slaughter, to usurp under false titles, they call empire. And where they make a desert, they call it peace. A phrase that's very, very famous. Where they make a desert, they call it peace. This is the world we live in, and it is driven by the same imperative that drove Rome and in the end destroyed her: usury. It was usury finance that paid the legion's wages, but it was the exponential increase in the debt that finally ended Rome. Sometimes the only thing we learn from history is that no one learns anything from history. Again, we have unleashed the beast of usury finance. We have ridden on its back, and it has proved a fearsome mount. But its appetite is gargantuan, and we are no longer able to feed it, even though the Americans and the coalition of the willing are active on every continent on earth, rampaging through the hapless people's lives. There is no way out. The debt can never be paid. Finally, the cave enters our story again. A man, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, enters the cave annually during the lunar month of Ramadan, fasting, seeking the truth. For extended periods of time, day and night, it is there in the night, in the darkness of the cave, within the darkness of his inner world, that something happened. It was not the philosopher's quest for the truth, because their truth is then expressed in words that they themselves utter. That is noble, but it is their attempt to express what they humanly have comprehended. And we have already seen that the problem here is that they think they are outside the equation. This is the terrible paradox of science and philosophy. Indeed, they think they are going to find a pure knowledge, science and philosophy untainted by the human passions, love and hatred, that have caused so much trouble in history and in community and in the family. They forgot, however, that if you do not have love and hate, you also do not have mercy and compassion. What they did not know is that which was only to be discovered by neurophysiology in the last couple of decades, that it is impossible to have a thought without an emotion. That people who are damaged neurologically, who are damaged emotionally in some way, cannot think. Thus we have been thinking with our emotions all the time. Or rather, our emotions have been at work all the time, even in the most apparently rational of men. More's the pity. And who knows what emotions they were. We have encountered various types of language in our journey, the truth and the noble lie. We have not tried to approach other types, such as the half-truth and the outright lie. But all of these are types of human language. Something different happened in the cave. The truth itself spoke, as it had done before, on the tongues of other men, Moses and Jesus among them, and countless unknown men in every culture throughout history, peace be upon them all. It announced in subsequent years many of its own names, among which are light and mercy and Nur, Ar-Rahman. This is a non-anthropomorphic occurrence. This has to be stressed because we live in a culture that quite correctly has fled from religion and from God because God had been anthropomorphized. The name of mercy was the most troublesome to the pagan Arabs. In their language, it is Ar-Rahman, the All-Merciful. Like Plato, whose philosophical reflections led him to the allegorical image of the Son of Good, the knowledge that goodness is fundamental in the universe, the truth, Al-Haq, spoke on the tongue of the man Muhammad, peace be upon him, and made clear that in its essence it is benign and merciful. To do so, it chose this name, Ar-Rahman, that caused the Arabs so much difficulty. And in doing so, in a human language, it did something very profound. He derived his own name of mercy from a word, Rahim. And who knows what Rahim is? The womb. Rahim is the womb. It's also ties of kinship, particularly maternal ties of kinship, the relatives one has through one's mother. the womb, indicating the womb as the supreme indicator that man in existence is like the utterly helpless fetus cared for by divine providence. And as we have noted, the meaning of the matrix was originally a womb. The frightening thing is that we really do have a choice. And yet even that is determined. The matrix of mercy or of paranoia and fear. In what I want to say now, I am speaking as much to Muslims as to non-Muslims. All the old divisions and oppositions have been abolished. Just as much as English people are aware of the flood of foreigners invading their land, many or most of them apparently Muslims, so elsewhere Muslims and others are scratching their heads over other very real invasions of their lands, whether through globalization or the war on terror. So what were once entirely different zones have now become thoroughly mixed. The values are also now mixed. Some Muslims are more earnest believers in the technological, scientific and banking world and in the values of democracy and liberalism than are today's slightly jaded and in many cases thoroughly radicalized Europeans and Westerners. Whatever the case, and even though the boundaries are now all abolished, there is a difference. There are two utterly different ways of life. I hope that my rather rambling talk has helped perhaps to delineate the edges of the two under the genuine boundaries that can never be abolished. I cannot speak from a position of superiority. Rather, I was invited to come and address you, and I have done that. The choices remain for me to make as much as for anyone else, and will do until the day I die. And that is only right and proper. That is what the world was created for. It is a matter of knowledge. One does not will to believe in spite of one's doubt. You have to rationally examine the evidence and make an informed choice. You can ask any question you wish, and there will be, I promise you, an answer that will not leave you in any doubt. This way has no church and no priesthood. Appearances in Saudi Arabia and Iran to the contrary. There is no dogmatic theology, but rather a set of intellectual tools that help in approaching these matters. There is no political authority over belief. And from that rational position of clarity of belief freely arrived at by the questioning soul, there is the possibility of a lift-off to another, more direct and vital condition. A direct knowledge of the divine that needs no proof or evidence and leaves no room whatsoever for doubt. When that happens, the tongues and the pens fall silent, unless their owners are moved by a power beyond themselves. And when that happens, the result is clear and unequivocal. If I were to leave you with a single word, it would not be belief, but trust. We need to relearn trust, along with a good many other qualities that have fallen into abeyance. The beginning of that is to begin to trust yourself. And the core of that is to begin to trust. The heart is not just a pump. It is the core of the intellect, not the head. But it is intellect with feeling and emotion. These are lost skills that need to be regained. There's no particular reason why you should trust a stranger who comes and delivers a talk, even if he happens to be some kind of expert, which I don't claim. Having regained trust in your own heart, you must find others whom you can trust, and indeed, if you do regain that trust, that will happen. And that can be the beginning of a renewal of the human situation, and nothing else will be. Nothing else will be. I thank you for your patience and your concentration. May Allah reward you all. And I'm very happy to meet with people. I haven't come as an expert to such that I should be asked questions in that way, but I'm very happy to meet with people and to discuss any of the issues that have been thrown up by this talk. Alhamdulillah.